Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the most overpowered tank in World of Tanks, at least from a perspective of a tank that just demolishes the opponents in the game and becomes a real nuisance for pretty much anyone that you'll be facing in such a tank. It is, of course, the Object 279E, the Tier 10 reward vehicle that just the best players seem to do so well in. And of course, today's video is going to be showcasing how the 279E is so powerful and why it is that so many people want to play this thing. Now, the player that we are looking at in question is called Absolute, or at least the shortened version, because the full version is a little bit rude. Anyway, we're looking at how he can actually come away with the victory in this result and how he manages to have one of the nicest games I've seen in the 279E since the latest patch within World of Tanks. And of course, what we're seeing here is a mastery by a tank player that's actually managed to 3-mark the Object 279E, which is no easy feat, believe me, because the majority of players that actually own this tank are very experienced players that know how to play World of Tanks very well, at least in the majority of cases. However, you know, trying to mark against the highest tier players, you know, I mean, just by default is going to be super hard, and you can see that happening with the majority of players playing World of Tanks. Now, within this replay, we're going to see how the 279E, it can kind of be a nuisance, and you're seeing here, even against tanks like the Rhinoceronte, you'd think that that tank would be able to bounce. Now, that just is not the case because of the heat round penetration that the 279E gets, and that's 340mm of penetration on this pretty disgusting tank, which means that the majority of tanks that you come up against, even the strongest parts of their frontal armor is just basically null and void. There's no point in you even like aiming at them because you can basically pen them anywhere. And that's really where the problem lies for the majority of the enemy team, is that you can pen them, but they just have no chance of penning you because the frontal armor of the 279E is so powerful. And you're seeing that as he stomps this entire flank with receiving 0 hit points worth of damage after receiving so many premium ammunition penetrations on him, or at least having received so many premium ammunition rounds hitting his tank. Now, most heavies, if they'd seen that markup down in the bottom left, they'd be crying right now on about half their hit points at the very best, to be honest. But the 279E is completely different. This tank's armor model from the front means that you cannot pen the upper plate basically unless you're a Jaegeru with heat rounds. The lower plate is literally non-existent. The only way that you can actually pen is if you come up above a ridgeline and shoot the underneath of the front of the 279E. And even then, sometimes it's a little bit troll to bounce off. And of course, you do have a cupola, but for the majority of the time, if you get hold down or you're using any degree of gun depression, trying to hit the cupola is very difficult. And even then, like, you will still bounce off of this thing, which makes it super hard to really win, or at least, again, win one-on-one against the 279E. And you're seeing that actually a skillful bit of relocation here has meant that he's been able to come back on defense and hopefully be able to help his teammate out against the Object 279E, the Progetto here, and of course the Object 277, I believe it was, that was also over here. Oh no, the 60TP, sorry. Now then, having done 3,839 damage, you'd be pretty okay at this point in the battle, having 4 minutes gone within this replay. Of course, the first 1 minute, it's typically where you don't do any damage anyway whilst you get into position. But yeah, having done that much damage is a very nice kind of gameplay result. In a scenario where you're like this, the majority of players usually just YOLO for some reason. They try and just get into a kind of up close and personal scenario against a lot of the opponents that they have in front of them, which for all intents and purposes is not a good idea. The 279E should be played more like a super kind of defensive tank. I'm not saying that you shouldn't advance. The 279E can definitely advance using the W key, just holding it continuously and just going forward, but what I mean is that in scenarios where you have the advantage by just being a more defensive tank where the enemy just cannot pen you, that's exactly what the 279E does best. And you're seeing him just advance towards the 60TP, who kind of snuck out of nowhere, to be honest. He obviously came around this part and came up and tried to get into a nice position whilst his teammates got taken out from the game, which is, yeah, not particularly too nice for his team. However, Having kind of pushed through this flank, he notices that the enemy team are now kind of coming back on themselves to defend the base against this Leopard PTA, who is of course inevitably going to get taken out within this replay, and of course that is not the ideal scenario. He of course absolutely decides to actually turn around and go back to defend the kind of advancing forces or potential advancing forces of the enemy team. Having done 5,567 damage, it showcases that the tank can actually dish out damage pretty rapidly, to be honest. I think you've got about a 10-second reload, somewhere around there. Don't quote me on that. It could be even less. It could be more slightly, but roughly around there. And with 440 alpha that this thing gets, it's pretty nice. You've also then got 5,500 damage, which we've talked about, but you've also got the block damage, 3,500, and this is what the tank relies upon. There are so many gameplays on World of Tanks where someone has managed to accomplish the 15,000 damage mark blocked by the Object 2790, and that is because of the armor model and the way that we've talked about it before within this replay. But one thing that I want to note within World of Tanks is that this Leopard 1 obviously knows that the 2790 is a pain in the ass to actually try and avoid, and so he tries running away, but because of the reload of the 2790, it's very difficult that you can even get away from this thing, because not only is this thing not stupidly slow, it's also got a very nice rate of fire like we talked about, and that allows him to pump 3 rounds into a tank that was trying to run away. And it's not a slow tank. The Leopard 1 is a pretty fast medium tank within World of Tanks, which means that, yeah, it can be very, very hard for opponents to really do much against you. And now there are 2 other Leopard 1s trying to poke this ridgeline, which, to be honest with you, is probably not the best idea. Now what you're seeing him do now is kind of just baiting the opponents, just keeping his cool, making sure that he doesn't lose any hit points suddenly, because that can happen in the 2790 if they catch you by your side or they catch you out or something similar to that, then yeah, you can lose your hit points pretty quickly. However, within this replay, he has managed to keep cool, keep calm, and be able to kind of bait the opponents that keep trying to poke to be able to get this AMX-30 that's on this flank, and he can just deal the damage to them as they do that. Of course, baiting your kind of team, or using your team as bait, I should say, is not it's pretty toxic to a degree, but of course it works so well within World of Tanks, and I really implore most of you, if your team are going to do some silly plays like just going straight down into like 3 opponents that are waiting there for you to make that kind of stupid misplay, then you might as well capitalize on your teammates' unfortunate demise or their unfortunate play, which means you can capitalize it and get damage and also help them out and make it actually less bad for your team that someone has decided to make a bad play. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. Now, with the enemy team kind of staying very passive and artillery deciding that it's going to dump a nice heat round, or not heat round, but HE round onto him for 350 damage, he can't stay here forever. You know, the artillery piece could keep doing this continuously. He's not really making much of an impact, and that is where you see the sudden change of pace, and where I think the difference between the highest tier players in World of Tanks and the kind of players that just don't quite get it yet is that you can relocate, and sometimes if the engagement isn't to your advantage or it isn't going to benefit you to where you'd like it to, then move if you have the opportunity to do so. Don't get me wrong, if there's 10 tanks against you and like you literally are down one flank, there's no point in trying to change around the map, because they're all going to gang up on you anyway at some point, so make a stand where you think is appropriate. However, what you can see here is what happens when the 2790 has enough time and also has the ability to move, because this tank goes 35 kilometers an hour, maybe slightly faster depending on the equipment that you run in the tank, and also the variety of extras that you can add on to this tank. But ultimately, this tank is very, very capable in the hands of a capable player, and even very capable in the hands of someone that maybe doesn't know as much what they should be doing. And you can see here, he's found the tortoise in the centre of the map that's obviously looking in the wrong direction, and he places a nice round into him. The tortoise here, thinking that he has armour model, yeah, he doesn't. Surprise. The tortoise getting penned by the 340mm of heat pen is, yeah, no match really for the 2790. Now, he should be very aware that there is the M6Y that was behind him. There's also 2 leopards that are currently spotted, so he doesn't have to worry too much about them. However, you can see him just trying to get the shell into the Leopard if possible, if he gets spotted, or maybe he lines himself up there, blind fires him, whatever the case may be. Hopefully he can do that. You'll see that he's actually loaded a AP round within this matchup to try and make sure that, well, not make sure, but he doesn't need to fire heat against a Leopard 1. He doesn't need to fire heat against a Skoda T50. The only tank you should really be loading heat for, I guess, if you want to make sure that you're guaranteeing pens, is the M6Y, the tier 10 the tier 9 American kind of heavy / yo tank. You know, it's a tank that you definitely could potentially argue that you should fire a little bit of premium against if you want to make sure 100% of the time that you're penning them, and therefore that's probably what he would be looking to do. And now he is firing the AP rounds at the minute, which means that if he does come up against the M6Y, then it could be a little bit painful. However, he doesn't actually going to be painful when the M6Y just tries to get around him. It doesn't actually showcase any of the kind of side of his tank either, which means that he's not going to be able to pen him. The M6Y obviously doing what he thinks is quite possibly the way that he can get out of it, but unfortunately the reload of the Object 279E shuts him down, and that is it for the M6Y. Now he has got the heat rounds loaded for the Skoda T50, which he's going to hopefully place a round into. He does get slightly lucky with the accuracy being on his side, and he places that round into said Skoda T50. Now the Leopard 1 now trying to get behind the T110E3, which he successfully does, and of course removes the remaining hit points, leaving it in a 1 versus 4 scenario for the Object 279E. And Absolute here is probably in a pretty strong position, having 2080 hit points worth of health left within this game, and of course the enemy team having 2565 hit points worth of health as well. So in this scenario he's got to make sure that he's going to try and get the Leopard 1, which would be good. If he can get him out of the game, then he can focus on the remaining 3 tanks. Now he goes over this side hoping that maybe he'd spot the Leopard as he kind of advanced through the hill. That doesn't happen, and of course there is another Leopard and a Skoda that he needs to be very wary of, especially the Skoda, because with the 3-shot autoloader with 320 alpha per shot, that could be very painful if he catches the side and would leave him in a bit of a dire scenario. Now that doesn't happen, and that means that he's able to kind of farm the Leopard 1, albeit one of them, to a fairly substantial low amount of hit points, which means that almost all of them are one shot, except from, of course, the Skoda T50, which could take 2 shells, and that is where that tank could be the biggest threat within this game. You see him using kind of what you should be using within World of Tanks is, of course, trying to bait the opponent into thinking that you're aiming in a different direction. They then poke, but actually you're aiming exactly where you need to be, and just hope that the swivel on your tank is good enough to make sure that you do pen. Now the Leopard 1 on the enemy team, as with all of the Leopards that seem to try and run away, has just received his final hit of the game, and that is coming in against him, and that is exactly what you want to do. Now he tries to hit the Skoda T50 there, but unfortunately that means that he is no longer able to remove all 3 tanks within the game with the ammunition that he has left, so he would have to ram a tank on the enemy team to secure that. He now should be thinking, well, maybe I'd be able to ram the Skoda T50, albeit he is on 390 hit points or 380 hit points. He finishes off the Leopard 1, which is perfect, and at this point I don't know if I would try and YOLO the Skoda, or at least do something like that, because if you don't actually hit him with your round, then you would have some ammunition left, and therefore you could have taken out the artillery piece. However, in this replay, that doesn't happen. There is no ammunition left in his tank. He has just absolutely decimated the entire enemy team. And of course, if you did enjoy this replay, make sure to leave a like. You can see the victory screen here on the game. And of course, let me know what you think. If you want me to check out any other decent replays, then you can send your replays in to the channel link that I will leave at the bottom of this video, the email link I should say. And of course, if you want me to actually review any specific tanks, then leave them in the comment section down below. And of course, if you want to check out other replay, then I will leave the gameplay and tank reviews playlist, which showcases the best replays on World of Tanks on screen on the right hand side. And on the left hand side, I'll showcase you the best world record breaking heavy tank French tank within World of Tanks. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you there. Goodbye.